Okay, YouTube folks, good morning. Welcome. We got a special guest, Vanessa Spina, today. I'm very excited to talk to her, so hopefully you guys tune in. If you want the full live stream, head on over to meteorx.com. Get a free membership for a month. Click on members, community, and you can jump in these live stream. All right, guys, let's get going here.
Hi, can you
There
hear
we
me?
go. Okay, I apologize profusely for the delay and for the technical jumps, but
No
anyway,
worries at all.
thank you for being. Are you in the Czech Republic currently, or where are you at
Yes,
currently?
I'm
Okay,
still in Prague.
okay.
We decided to stay here, and yeah, so it's about 6 p.m. for me, dinner time. You guys are just starting your day like last time, and I've
Yeah,
had a
yeah.
full day already.
We have a lot of folks from Europe in here, actually. So it's really nice. We've got this really international community. So some folks are with you. I don't know if we got anybody from the Czech Republic. Uh, gosh, I don't know if I told you. I was born right near Czech Republic. I was born just on the border in Hof,
You
Germany.
didn't
Yeah,
tell me that.
yeah. So I was real close to there. I went to Prague. I don't know. Gosh, I don't know when it was in the '90s. I guess it was really beautiful. I really enjoyed it. Late '90s, but it's a pretty city. Um, Vanessa, for people that don't know you, and many people in the ketogenic space will know you, but some people here might not know, might be aware. Can you give us a little background history?
Absolutely, I would love to. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on today. I'm so happy to be here with our wonderful community that you've done such a huge, amazing job building. I have been in this space for about 6 years. I used to work in finance. I had my stockbroker's license, and I always studied nutrition on the side. It was my electives in university, and I always loved it, but I never thought of doing a serious career out of it. And 6 years ago, I started doing Ketogenic Girl. I started blogging about it and sharing recipes, and the growth and the demand was just insane. Like, people were just asking me for recipes, for meal plans, for everything. I ended up writing my book, Keto Essentials, which is also Victory Belt, same publisher, I think, as you. And it's been a wild ride. I went on a book tour. Like, I felt like a rock star. I've been touring around and doing lots of speaking, and I'm just so passionate about keto, and I really think it's our natural state, to be in ketogenesis. So I'm so passionate about the power, the healing power of this kind of diet, and just reaching more and more people all the time. So I love to just go around the world and speak about it and talk about, the hormonal aspects of all this. And then I ended up going back to school. I did two programs at the same time. So I became a sport nutrition specialist as of last summer. And I also went back to U of T, and I got a certificate in biochemistry and biomedical science so that I could better understand biochemistry and physiology. So it's been awesome.
And you've applied some of that to your own life to make a pretty significant health transformation. I see your before and afters, and you're definitely, and you continue to look just healthy as can be with this sort of robust, vital look to you. So tell us a little bit about maybe a little bit of your health journey.
Yeah, so as you know, Shawn, I think I was vegetarian for 17 years. And I decided to become vegetarian when I was about 17. And I just felt like I needed to somehow do it for moral reasons. And I ended up moving to Vancouver, which is on the West Coast, and it's very similar to California. It's a vegetarian mecca. Like, I fell right into that, and all around me were people living this way, vegetarian restaurants everywhere. I was in university. I was watching all the propaganda films, and I was feeling like this is, the best thing to do for the environment, for the animals, I'm saving the planet, not eating meat. Like, I felt so virtuous. I didn't realize that it just made me feel really good about myself without actually ever doing anything. Like, I could just sit on my couch and feel so good about this choice that I was making, and I didn't realize how badly it was affecting my health. And I did a post actually that you retweeted not too long ago, and it was about how my health got so bad that my vegetarian doctor told me to start eating animals again. And I mean, he had been vegetarian his whole life. Like, that's completely what he believed in. And he actually writes textbooks for the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition. He's like, you need to add in some eggs, some poultry, some, seafood, because your health is getting so bad. And I started gradually, adding things back in. And then eventually I went keto 6 years ago and made the transition back to eating meat. And then it's just been, my health has just been improving since then in doing this and adding more meat. And then I went carnivore a couple years ago, like keto carnivore, which is kind of what I still do now. And it just keeps getting better. So I made the choice to become vegetarian because I really, truly believed it was the best thing for the planet, and it was the best thing that you could do for your health. Like, that's what we're sold. Will make you the healthiest possible. And it's such a lie. And I'm so glad that I figured it out, because I felt like a 9-year-old woman and I was in my 20s, and now it's kind of the opposite. So it's been really awesome.
Yeah, but often the case is you lose weight on a vegetarian diet, you get skinny, and that I think that's something that's maybe it's better than being obese, but gosh, there's so many other issues that come up besides that. So talk to me. So and I know you were going back to school, and you've been very interested, and you've been obviously delving into the science. And so what sort of things do you think you've learned either through personal experience, which I don't think people should dismiss that, and then what you can find in the literature, because the science, there's a lot of science out there, and there's a lot of, and I read articles. I mean, literally every day I read. I mean, most evenings I read 2 or 3 scientific articles to talk about. I mean, I've been doing this stuff for years now, but the more I dig into it, the more you realize it's so much nuance and so complex. But what have you? Can you come off with some broad topics you'd like to discuss that you think people need to be aware of?
So the first thing I'd love to talk about is body recomposition. So you mentioned by being vegetarian, you lose weight, but what was happening to me is I was becoming skinny fat. So I kept losing weight on the scale, and yet I was becoming more and more fat on the inside. I didn't realize it. And then when I gained weight back, when you do these kinds of diets, you lose, fat and muscle, and then you gain weight after you just gain fat, and you go through enough of those cycles that eventually I had my body composition tested, and I was at almost 40% body fat. And the scan tech looked at me like, how is that possible? Because I didn't look obese on the outside. And so I think that's one of the things that can really happen with high carb diet, is you can really wreck your body composition. And I became so under muscled, and that was really going to affect my life. If I continued that way, I probably would have just continued to gain body fat and lose muscle. And one of the things that I learned through studying physiology and just doing this myself, like you said, is that you can really recompose your body, because you really are what you eat. And if you're eating a lot of carbs, it's a non-essential macronutrient, whereas all the essentials, the essential amino acids that we have to get from outside sources, are found in protein, and they're found in, the essential fats are found in fats. So you're so much more likely to get all the nutrients that you need when you are eating more this kind of diet, because all the essentials that your body can't make themselves, you can get from your diet. Whereas when you're shooting for that, 200-300 grams of carb per day, and you may or may not be vegetarian, like, you're just much less likely to get what your body needs, and your body composition will suffer. So I think it's a great message. I see a lot of people are understanding more and more, like, not to rely on what the scale says, because, if you're trying to lose weight and you see the scale going down, it may not necessarily be a good thing if you're just becoming a smaller version of yourself and your body composition is being compromised. So since you and I talked, I think I was on your podcast about 2 years ago, I've been able to add 8 pounds of muscle in that time. And that's just through, eating, really prioritizing protein, and also adding in resistance and strength training. So I'm really passionate about that. And, I was able to reconfirm all these things in studying physiology and biochemistry. And it's all in there, it's all in the textbooks. And I know a lot of physicians like yourself study biochemistry, and you see, well, we have these essentials that we have to get, and protein is so important. And yet, the RDA, I have to fact check this, but the RDA is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram I was recently told that that number comes from wartime when rationing was happening, and the UK was afraid that Germany was going to try and cut off their meat supply. So they made sure that every person got zero point 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight in order to make sure they didn't die. And that's the number that we now use as a daily allowance, or a lot of people interpret it as a ceiling, and yet that's the minimum to not die. So I think one of the coolest things about the carnivore space is that it's really shown people that they can eat more protein, that they can thrive on more protein, and realizing that that number is set so low, and it really concerns me for certain segments of our population, especially that are older, that need even more protein to protect themselves from losing that lean mass. So there's a lot of great body recomposition that can come from doing this kind of lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things with this carnivore diet, even though many people do it in a very high-fat approach for different reasons, for different metabolic reasons, as you know, the sort of the typical diet for the U.S. is about 15% protein, and on a carnivore diet, I mean, most people are getting 20%, 30%, so much more, and we're seeing a lot of improvements in body recomposition. I think some of that data, if you go back even further, prior to World War II, they were looking at nitrogen balance. You could look at the work of particularly some of the diabetic researchers looking at this. There's a guy named Newberg, which I've been reading a lot of his stuff lately, and they talk about, what do we get to maintain nitrogen balance? And so some of those numbers are derived from there. But recently, guys like Stu Phillips and the others say that the nitrogen balance equations may not hold up, and they're not necessarily accurate anyway. And so a lot of those guys are recommending per kilogram 1.2, 1.6, something like that, for bodybuilders and athletes as high as 2 grams per kilo and stuff like that. So it depends. I am seeing, one thing that is of interest to me is within diabetics that at least initially protein can be an issue with regard to blood glucose control via things like gluconeogenesis. Although it's really interesting, the theoretical limit of protein conversion to glucose is roughly, like for meat is around like 60%, 58%. However, the theoretical doesn't really hold up with isotopic studies, and so they see much lower numbers. And interestingly, in fact, I just read a paper on this last night. Glutamate seems to be the biggest driver of that. Whereas we used to think it was alanine. Was one of the most gluconeogenic amino acids, as you're probably aware. Most amino acids have a gluconeogenic potential, except for leucine and lysine, depending on what you read. Some of them, those two are strictly ketogenic, and the other ones have kind of a mixed or solely gluconeogenic precursor. So it's interesting in different populations, but I think as a general rule, for most of the population, particularly as you become metabolically healthier, the higher protein is it can be beneficial for sure. And I think the most important thing is lean muscle mass. That is such a metabolic luxury to be able to have that lean muscle mass, not only for functional reasons, but for metabolic reasons and for reasons of longevity and health. And we know the correlations between lean muscle mass and lack of cancer, lack of heart disease, lack of neurodegenerative disease, longevity are pretty compelling. So I think that's important. So regardless of how you get there, it's important to get there, I think.
I've been doing closer to 40% protein now, and I'm doing like a higher protein experiment, and I'm going to be doing my next body scan in October to see what the difference is from doing 40% protein. And like, I feel fantastic on it. And I think it's great for people to just experiment at different levels and find how they feel, because you hear all the time some people are like, I don't feel good on high protein, and other people, like me, feel great on it. So that it may vary from person to person, but the only way to figure it out is by trying it for yourself. But for me, 40% protein was like, I thought my health was great before, but it's next level in terms of the satiety effect that it has for me. And I know that it's not like that for everybody, but for me, it's just like I got to the point where I became too thin because I was like not able to eat enough meat because it just was so satiating for me. And I was eating like a lot of organ meats and pate. And, but I'm just finding that 40% number is, now that I've, because I'm doing it with resistance training, like that's another, aspect to it. If you're doing high protein, like you should be doing some weight training, so you're doing something with it.
I think that's an important caveat. I've been giving some virtual lectures lately on, kind of the sort of the lessons from the field from Carnivore. And so one of the things that I find, and there seems to be a little bit of a difference between the sexes in fat to protein sort of preferences, I would say. I don't say about requirements, but preferences for how they feel. And I think that resistance training is a huge caveat there, because if you're resistance training, then probably, well, I wouldn't even say probably, I'd say definitely, your protein needs generally go up some. So, and honestly, I think resistance training is extremely important. So I think that's something that we should definitely all be doing, at some point. Everybody's not at that stage yet. And so we've got a lot of people that are, just learning how to walk again. So you can't ask them to go in there and deadlift, when they just haven't been walking for 3 weeks. So, those things are great. That's great information. I made this little carnivore shredding guide for people, and it was definitely a very high protein approach, even as much as 70% at times. And it works. I can tell you for 100%, certainly it works. I don't think eating protein at that high of a level over a long time is sustainable. One of the things that I found that was very important was to do fat refeeds within that, because I do think, because you're getting, if you're at 40% protein, presumably you're getting, another 50, 60% fat in there, depending on how much carbohydrate you're eating. And so I think that, I just think you can't undervalue the necessity of fat in the diet, just like you can't undervalue the necessity of protein. As you know, and I know, that carbs are conditionally beneficial but not essential. And I think that's an important caveat there, that for some people that carbohydrates are fine, for other people they're not fine. Not all carbs are and I've always maintained that carbohydrates aren't evil and they're not the enemy. I tend to say with the point of this carnivore diet is, it's not that the glucose molecule is necessarily bad. It's what it's packaged in. What other things come with that? How are you getting your glucose? Is it coming from a high oxalate containing food, a high phytic acid containing food, a GI irritant containing food? Maybe not. Maybe that's a problem for you. Maybe it's not. And so I think that's an important sort of distinction here. And that's why I tell people to kind of do what works for you. And this is what we see a lot of people that will go on a carnivore diet, and they'll do well, they'll fix a lot of health issues, and then they'll say, well, I want to add something back in. And I'm totally fine with that. I think that's great. It's whatever works for you. What we do find is a lot of people it's kind of interesting. They'll go off and they'll start adding, 30% carbohydrate in. They'll do it for 3-4 months, and they'll say, I felt better on carnivore. They just come right back, which is kind of funny. So I think it's something that, we see cyclically. Maybe there's something to cyclically adding in berries in here and there. Who knows? I mean, we still stuff we're learning on, but and I see Brooke talking about Ray Pete's work. You can try it and see. Go experiment, do your experiment. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, you can always come back. there's no law here. This isn't unlike veganism veganism, and certainly this isn't an ideology. It's just, the ideology is get healthy. So let me ask you about, what are your thoughts on ketosis? You're a ketogenic girl. Do you think ketosis is something we should strive for? Is it something that's essential? Should we always be in ketosis? Is ketosis itself beneficial, or is it just the absence of certain foods and ketosis is just a side product? What are your thoughts?
So I think it just depends on the individual and their goals. I think for the average person, that if they've experienced a state of ketogenesis, that they've realized that there's a lot of benefits to it. And ketones are just such incredible molecules. Like, we keep learning new things about them. They're signaling molecules. They may be HDAC inhibitors. They have these properties that pharmaceutical companies are spending millions and billions of dollars into trying to replicate the effects that ketones have. And I think that it is an ideal state. Actually, my last presentation at KetoCon was ketogenesis is our natural state, is our ideal state. I think it puts the body in homeostasis. It puts the body in a great state where it, people get all these benefits of mental clarity and feeling energetic. And, I know I definitely get a lot of benefits from it, but I think that it's, at the end of the day, it depends what your goals are, and your goals can change depending on where you are. So like for about 6 years, my priority was ketogenesis. I wanted to be in ketosis all the time. Now my priority is building lean mass, and I'm not looking at getting into ketogenesis so much anymore as a priority. For me, it's more what's going to, help me to build lean mass as much as possible. And I'm doing more of a modified ketogenic diet with higher protein. So, I've seen ketones go down. Part of that, and I know this is disputed by some people, but part of that is my body becoming more efficient at utilizing ketones. And I know some people think that doesn't happen, but it definitely does. When you look at physiology, the body is constantly adapting, and it's so intelligent. It's at the beginning, I would get ketones of 6 to 8 millimolar, and my body just didn't know what they were like. What are these tiny pieces of fat? Like, what do we do with these? It couldn't use them. And I think a lot of people don't realize the body at first, the mitochondria has to adapt to burning ketones for fuel. And so over time, it stops overproducing them. And, it's one of the things that we talk about all the time, the metabolic advantage. You get this wastage of energy when your body's overproducing ketones. But after a while, when you're doing it long enough, it just learns to make what you need. And it learns, what you need and how much you need based on what you're doing, unless you're constantly changing things up all the time. So, ketones will go down, but if you have body fat to burn and you are also consuming fat, your body is going to be going into ketogenesis, going to be making ketones, but the levels depend on what your goals are and what you're looking for. And I think, it's okay to go in and out of it and not worry so much about being in this continuous state of ketogenesis all the time, and just doing what feels best to you and your body, and, following whatever goals you have in that, moment.
Yeah, I mean, what you say about, utilizing versus wastage, I mean, that's clear. I mean, obviously, you produce them, you use them, and you waste them. And, obviously people, when they first go on ketogenic diet, they have the ketone breath, and their urine strips are turning purple. And, as you get done wasting them, and you do get more efficient at utilizing them. I mean, and that's clear. And so a lot of people, initially when they're in ketosis, yeah, they're basically breathing out and urinating out energy. And so they lose some weight, and then your body adapts to that, and it's no longer happening as much. And so, as much as you struggle, the more fat you eat, the more you just try to just desperately drive those ketones up. It sometimes backfires on you, because this is where you get the people that are just drinking all the bulletproof coffees and just adding unnecessary calories in a desperate effort to drive their ketones up. And that's, and again, I always talk about keep the goal. If your goal is to get lean and that type of stuff, then there's that. If your goal is just to have as high as ketones as possible, you may not get the actual results you want. You can, like I said, you can take exogenous ketones and drink MCT oil and get your ketones up high. It doesn't necessarily going to translate into body composition. So it's an important concept. I mean, certainly, there, like I said, cancer patients, epileptic patients, some of those folks that will definitely maybe do better with higher ketone levels. But even still, it doesn't need to be 5. I mean, it can be 1. I mean, it's
we always think more is better, and yet it's fuel in your blood. Why do you always want more fuel?
Well, I mean, it's like, and this concept of, insulin is bad, and therefore my insulin should be 0. Is another misconception. Same thing with I think there's so many conditional things we can look at. I just did and I've talked about this in the past, but I kind of come around every year or so. I recycle material, and we're talking about I don't know if you've looked into this much, but protein has a lot of purines in it. Purines lead to often elevated uric acid, and people are worried about that. And they say, if I'm going to eat a lot of protein, am I going to get gout? Am I going to get kidney stones and that sort of stuff? So what do you know about that? Can you talk a little bit about, well, let's talk about let's talk about, just because, and I know the answer to this, but just so that more people hear this, let's talk about kidney damage and high protein diets. High protein diets gonna kill our kidneys?
So I follow all the research done by Dr. Jose Antonio and all of his protein overfeeding studies, and they showed no negative effects on body composition or organs from overfeeding on protein. Again, all of his studies are done in resistance trained individuals. So I haven't seen research on protein overfeeding in individuals who are not resistance trained, but they clearly show, that there is no negative impact. And the only thing that I've seen in the research is that the organs sometimes get larger, just like they get smaller when people, really restrict protein and don't get enough. The organs can shrink in size. Organs will get larger, but it's not a negative thing necessarily. So I don't know why we have so much fear of overeating protein. I do think that there is a point individually where someone can just be eating excess protein of what the body can utilize and do with. And as you know, the amino acids can't be stored, so they are utilized and they are oxidized if there is an excess. So that may potentially put an extra burden on, the body, on the liver, to have to take that nitrogen and sequester it. I don't know if putting really much more of a burden on the kidneys, but again, it's going to depend on the individual. Seeing disruptions, like waking up in the night and that kind of thing, that maybe they're eating a little bit too much protein. But for most people, the biggest fear that they see is their blood glucose goes up, and their blood glucose goes up in the night. But that is because the liver is making glucose either from protein or from stored body fat using the glycerol backbone on triglycerides. It's making glucose throughout the night to keep your brain alive. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just physiology. When you don't have steady carbs coming in, then your body does other things and it adapts. But I just don't think that should be said, well, that's a bad thing because your blood glucose goes up at night. I mean, it's just, like I said, just physiology.
Yeah. What about, have you looked into uric acid at all?
I haven't. I think I've read a few things, and that was with Dr. Jose Antonio. And, there didn't seem to be any negative effects. I know that Dr. Kate Shanahan does think that eating too much protein could potentially cause gout, but I think that what we've seen in low carb is that generally seems to be caused more by oxalates and oxalate crystals and buildup of that. I haven't really seen it with high protein, but you'd have to probably ask an expert in the field, like a nephrologist's opinion. I think probably Dr. Jason Fung's giving you a much better answer than I can provide on that. But I think, I think the bottom line is there's an amount of protein that's optimal for most people. I think a lot of people are below it, and that if you eat more than that, you're not really going to get any additional benefits from it. So there isn't really any point to eating in excess of the protein that you need. And everyone can find that protein, that sort of perfect optimal range for themselves.
Yeah. So I'll make a few comments here about this, just because what most people don't realize is uric acid is an incredibly powerful antioxidant, and really? Evolutionarily, primates, or at least the ones that eventually evolved into humans around 13 million years ago, lost the capacity to produce uricase. Uricase is what breaks down uric acid into something called allantoin. And what we see is our kidneys will hang on to about 90% of our uric acid. And the reason we do that is not because it's a waste product, is because we need it. So uric acid actually helps us. It protects us from neurodegenerative disease. It protects us from reactive oxygen species. And so uric acid is actually helpful to the human body. Now, What we do
Amazing.
know is that people that have high uric acid levels can develop gout. We'll see that there's like a population in New Zealand called the Maoris, which have another additional defect that leads to even higher uric acid levels. And they have some of the highest gout levels in the world currently. But 100 years ago, they did not have gout, despite having super high uric acid levels. So what has happened in the intervening 100 years? Well, the diet has gotten crappy. They've developed metabolic disease. And so now this population that previously had no gout, despite super high uric acid levels, now have gout. And it has to do with basically metabolic damage and metabolic disease. And so most people, in fact, 90% of people with high levels, or a significant percentage of people with high levels of uric acid, do not develop gout. And so what I will see is many people that come to the carnivore diet or high protein diet are metabolically unhealthy. They're inflamed. They have uncontrolled glucose, metabolic syndrome. And those people, when you drop more purines into the diet, which meat does or high protein does, they will develop a flare-up of gout initially, and they'll have to often be treated with medication. But as the metabolic syndrome resolves, then they can tolerate those high levels of uric acid, and now it's just beneficial. So it's conditionally dependent on other things. So just like maybe cholesterol is, and so many of these other factors. So it's one of these things where we just don't look at the whole picture. And so uric acid, and one of the thoughts is because we developed this loss of uricase and higher levels of uric acid, and as we became more and more human and more meat eaters, our need for vitamin C went down, because as you know, vitamin C is also an antioxidant. And so as our vitamin C requirement went down, our uric acid levels went up significantly. So this is sort of very interesting. So
That's
anyway,
fascinating. I'm so glad to know that, because I mostly focus on glutathione, and that I had no idea.
Yeah. Glutathione, obviously another one, superoxide dismutase, and there's several. There's a handful of our endogenous antioxidants, but the uric acid is actually one of the most abundant antioxidants in our body. So people give it a bad rap because it's related to gout, but again, it's conditional. And people that have gout almost always have some underlying metabolic dysfunction, whether it's insulin resistance or diabetes or something like that. So
that makes sense. How people always have a negative view on high protein, but that's high protein in the context of standard American diet, which does have a lot of negative effects. But when you're not on that, then and you have this more normalized insulin to glucagon ratio, you don't have those negative effects.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Yeah, I mean, all these things are conditional. Our understanding of even normal lab values are predicated upon believing that the standard American diet, the grain-based 55 to 60% carbohydrate diet, is appropriate and normal. And many of us would say it's probably not. Certainly, when we look at the proposed My Plate or USDA food pyramid or healthy diet for the Inuit in Alaska now, they're telling them how to grow carrots in the friggin' snow. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, you couldn't even make that diet happen anywhere in the world, just, outside of a very narrow range, maybe a few places in the tropics, but it would be impossible. I mean, these diets they propose, the food doesn't even grow on the same continent. And it's like, how the heck would a early human, even 200 years ago, do this? And it's just absolutely bizarre.
Yeah, when we were in Tanzania a couple years ago, the government there was making the Maasai now start to grow maize and make this corn paste and add carbs. And they wanted them to start eating that way because they were afraid of, there were a few years where there were droughts that had affected their cattle. And so when we were there, I thought we were going to see pure ketogenic, diet, and they were eating all this, maize, and they said that they had started doing this cornbread in the last several years, so that they're no longer doing a keto diet either.
I actually went to Tanzania back in 2000. Got to see some of the Maasai, climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, went to the Serengeti. It was kind of funny. They wanted to give me a wife. And I said, no, thanks. I got one, because I mean, a lot of the Maasai will have multiple wives, and, it's kind of crazy, but I mean, they were just, very robust, vigorous people. And I remember they offered me some of their blood milk
The
mixture that they
milkshake.
drink. Yeah, and I declined because I was like, and it just didn't appeal to me. Maybe to now I might do it, but back then I was like, no, thank you. But
Yeah.
did you get up there and do any of those things? Did you climb Kilimanjaro, any of those things?
We did like it was about 5 nights of camping in the Serengeti, which was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I think about it every week, just waking up in the morning at 5 a.m. and go out and see all the stars, and they'd have this like hot bucket of water and just like rinse your face. And we just camped, and there was nothing between us and all the lions and animals except the tent. So it was pretty intense and amazing. We talk about going back all the time. It was just beautiful. We got to spend a lot of time with the Maasai there, and spent full days with them, and did like lots of crafts and dancing, and they made the milkshake, and made some goat meat they cooked like on a bush fire. It was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, and I will tell you, and I was in South Africa many years ago, and doing the same thing, camping when I was young. And I mean, you heard, I think it was in Kilman, I think it was in the oh gosh, I'm
Kruger.
thinking Kruger Park, yeah, in Kruger Park, and you hear lions roaring at night. That is disconcerting. When you hear lions roaring close to you, that's impressive.
Yeah.
It's a
When we
very
got
scary
back,
thing, quite
we,
honestly. But
we missed
the
the
interesting thing
hyena.
about the Maasai, and all these indigenous tribes now is, they talk about, like today, and even compared to 50 years ago, you talk like these old folks that were around, and they said back when they were young, they could hunt all these big, massive animals. They were hunting elephant, and they were hunting big rhinoceros, and these big, giant antelope. And now, I mean, now all they're left with is like hunting baboons. I mean, they got no meat
Oh
left.
wow.
And I think this is analogous to what we saw with humans in general as we kind of hunted out all the megafaunal animals, going back 50 to 100,000 years ago. And then we saw this decline. And I think that's where, as you may be aware, human brain size peaked around, and we'll talk about Mickey Bendora will be here tomorrow. We'll talk about this, but around maybe 125, 150,000 years ago. This is when humans, Homo sapiens, had the biggest brain that we ever had, maybe as much as 1,500 cc's. And then we kind of lost access to those bigger, juicier animals. We started to rely more on plants, eventually, relying on agriculture to, feed ourselves. And then obviously, kind of become more, sedentary, civilized, no longer being the wandering nomads. And so our brain size shrunk by about 200 cc's. So it's pretty interesting to see what our natural species diet is. And then you go fast forward to where we are now, where we've got this industrial slop, and they're wanting to feed us cottonseed and, fake ground up soybeans and canola oil. And I mean, it's no wonder so many people are so sick.
How are you feeling on the high fat, by the way? Are you getting like in deep ketogenesis? Are you like, how's it been? Is your brain
I,
growing?
I haven't really been checking ketones. I've never been one to really worry about that. I've been doing the higher fat approach for, I don't know, 6 weeks or so now. And honestly, I feel fine. I honestly don't feel that much different than I was doing higher protein, because on the higher protein approach, I was still making sure I was getting fat in there. I probably had a little bit more hunger on the higher protein when it got 3 or 4 days in before I did my fat refeeds. And I thought that hunger was a little bit more of an issue. But again, I was eating 70% of my calories from protein. So, like we said, when you're eating 40%, 60%, you're basically eating ribeye steaks. I mean, that's kind of a nice spot to be in. Maybe, I mean, that's a pretty good, mixture of that stuff. So I'm still, like I said, I'm doing these things just so I know, and so on, because I think one of the nice things about this community is we've got different people that are dealing with different problems, and I think honestly there's different solutions in there, and I think the sort of the meat-based approach is extremely powerful. In fact, I think it's the most powerful medical intervention out there of anything. I don't care what it is, whether it's a drug, whether it's a diet. Meat-based just kicks ass on everything. And then, whether you scale up fat or scale up protein is going to be depending on where you're at from a metabolic health standpoint. So, but I mean, obviously meat is just so incredibly important. So, we'll see. I mean, I'm going to
You
continue
don't
with
feel
this
like
for
a
a
big
while. And
energetically?
what's that?
Is your energy levels different? Like your mental clarity, any of that stuff?
Well, I mean, most people would argue that my mental clarity has never been good because I'm a nut job, recommending meat-based diet. So I don't know. No, I mean, I would say, I guess, yeah, probably a little better. If I had to be objective about it, I'd say, yeah, I probably feel a little more energized, but again, there's a difference between 40% and 70% protein. And so, like I said, I think there's a get as lean as possible, as quickly as possible, get shredded so you can take a nice picture on Instagram version. And there's a, sort of a, maybe I don't need to get there that fast and I can do it, a little more sane, and like I said, some people want the insane route. It depends on your goal. I mean, like I said, a physique competitor, a bodybuilder is not necessarily a person that has a lot of mental sanity. But I mean, again, there's like I said, there's a health aspect and there's an athletic aspect and there's a physical composition aspect, and they don't always line up. I do think you can be very lean and be an athlete and be very healthy. I think that definitely is compatible, but I think a lot of people do it the wrong way. And so that's just kind of the deal with that.
I think you said something about your happiness.
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally pretty happy. I've always been a pretty kind of stable guy for the most part. But I mean, I do find that, and I think many people, they call it zero carb zen or carnivore calm or whatever. They're just chilled. I mean, they're generally got a smile on their face. They're generally pretty happy. They generally can respond to the stresses of life and take it without freaking out, and they don't have the sort of vacillations in mood. And I think it's overall, just kind of generally happy people. And so I think that's what I've found, to be the case for me. And I think a lot of people in the audience are giving it their thumbs up, saying they're noticing the same thing. So how about, have you looked at higher fat and protein and glucose in your personal experiments? I know you do a lot of biohacking. Glucose levels, A1C levels change a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm going to have blood work done when I do my next body scan in October. So I'll see it. So before doing this higher protein, I was doing strict keto macros for 4 years, and I had blood glucose like extremely low, A1C 4%, my fasting insulin 2%, just always had really high ketones. But when I started bumping up the protein, my body composition changes really accelerated. So they first went from 40% to 34% body fat in 4 years, but then in just 2 years from 34 to 21%. So that acceleration in the growing in the muscle and the reduced body fat for me was like, well, this is the route I want to go right now. And I did notice that my blood glucose did go up, but I've interviewed, Dr. Don Layman and Stu Phillips, and he and Dr. Gabrielle Line all really explain the physiology of why that happens, and that they do see higher cortisol, they do see higher blood glucose, but it's a product of not having carbs in the diet and overnight, your liver making that glucose for your brain. So I have added in a little bit more carb in terms of like yogurt sources to see if that makes a difference, and having some like green salads at night and seeing how that affects. It's lowered my blood glucose in the morning, but I'm really not concerned about it because I'm just seeing such great physical changes. So, I think I did that strict keto diet for 4 years. I might go back to that in the future, once I'm at like the body composition that I want to be at. I'm pretty close to it right now. So I just think that it was remarkable how much faster the body composition changes happened when I bumped the protein up from that more moderated level on keto. And, so much of this comes back to the individual. I was vegetarian for most of my life, barely eating meat. So I think I needed to add that much more in order to compensate for some of the protein that I missed out on all those years. So that may be an individual thing, but I'm not concerned about having slightly higher blood glucose. I understand the physiological mechanisms happening behind it. And also when you eat, big protein meals, glucagon makes your liver release some glucose too. So, that kind of stuff doesn't really concern me. But we'll see what happens in the future with it. Right now, it's just the body composition goals, and I'm really happy with how it's going.
Well, good for you. And I would suppose that you're doing some resistance training as well. You probably added some of that in there. Is that right?
Yeah, and I go for a 2-hour hike most mornings, and then I do 2 leg and glute days a week and 2 arm, core, and back days a week, and then I do usually a HIIT session and a couple rest days. But loving the resistance training. I can really see a difference. Like, I got the newbie gains going on, so that's been awesome. And it's just, I don't think I definitely wouldn't be getting these results without adding that in. So it's very empowering too, just to be like getting physically stronger. I think has ripple effects in other aspects of how I feel stronger in myself too, just as a person. So it's been really cool to discover that.
Yeah, I think that's a great sort of thing. And again, I can't oversell the power of resistance training again. And I've been preaching this forever, and so it's important. I'm glad you're doing it and you're discovering that, and it's a good thing to get out there. And so, again, protein requirements go up higher when you're resistance training. We know that. And so those things all kind of line up. And, ultimately, like I said, we get really, really wrapped up in some of these biomarkers. As I said on Joe Rogan podcast 3 years ago almost, I don't know what markers are necessarily relevant. And then everybody looked at me like I had a third eyeball. You're crazy. Why don't you believe in labs? Labs are everything. You can't be healthy if you don't know exactly what your labs are. And there's a lot of nuance to this stuff. And that's what I was trying to get, the point I'm getting across. I think people are starting to come around to this a little bit and understanding that, what we think is relevant may not be as relevant as you think. And there's a lot of context and nuance there. And that's kind of what hopefully more people are understanding. And, you've got to really, at the end of the day, I mean, it's so important to feel good and to be happy and to be happy with your function. And I mean, that's ultimately what our quality of life is about. Okay. Well, anyway, I've got to jump on. I got to go. I'm chatting with Dr. Uric Westman about some clinical trial design tips. So we're going to talk with him.
That's so exciting. Congratulations on that.
Yeah. So I'm getting a lot of feedback from different professional researchers, and we're interviewing people and looking at different organizations to do research to get this study done for us as we raise funding for it. So I'm just trying to make sure it's done extremely well designed, and we can use that to really sort of, like I said, I hope every single doctor on the planet will be comfortable prescribing a meat-based diet for patients that might need it, and I think that's good. Anyway, Vanessa, thank you so much for what you do. I love seeing your progress, your work. Keep being an advocate, and like I said, all of us together can make a difference. And feel free to jump in here anytime. This little community is and I say little, we are growing. We have thousands of us now. We're growing every day, but we are a little group that's going to grow and change the world. And we're proud to have you as part of our community and being one of our guests. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was an honor, Shawn.
Thank you. All right, guys, I'm going to shut it down. Tomorrow we have Mickey Bendor, some anthropology on. Be fun stuff, guys. So see you guys back tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.